I've been married to Lily for 10 years, a full decade of what I believed was a life we were building together, through thick and thin. At least, that's how I saw it. But if I'm being honest, our marriage often felt like it was coasting on autopilot. It wasn't bad, just routine, predictable. That was fine, until recently, when I started noticing small changes. At first, they were so subtle I almost missed them. But over time, those small cracks started to spread, like a spiderweb in glass. Once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. It began with her appearance. Lily had never been one to care much about trends or obsess over her looks. She wasn't lazy, just comfortable. She was the kind of woman who'd spend a Saturday lounging in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, binge-watching crime shows. So when she suddenly started updating her wardrobe, it caught my attention. Out went the casual, comfy clothes, and in came tight-fitting dresses that hugged her figure. Her makeup became more polished too, bold lipstick that seemed like overkill for a quick grocery run. Then came the gym. Lily, who had never shown much interest in working out, suddenly signed up for a gym membership. Just like that, she was going 3 times a week. She'd come home flushed, drenched in sweat, and glowing in a way I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, saying it was for her health. But something about her answer didn't sit right with me. After a decade together, you develop a sense for the little shifts in someone's behavior. And when those changes don't seem to involve you, it starts to raise questions. One day, I asked her casually if everything was okay. She gave me a smile, the kind that stopped short of her eyes, and said she was just focusing on taking better care of herself. Her words sounded practiced, like she'd rehearsed them just in case I asked. I nodded, but my gut told me there was more to it. Not long after, a new name started creeping into our conversations, Jacob Britt. She mentioned him in passing at first, saying he was funny, recommending a book he'd told her about. Jacob was a younger guy, a smooth-talking marketing rep who had recently joined her team. But the way she talked about him, it felt different. Her tone had a spark to it, something I hadn't heard in a long time. And when I tried to ask about him, she got defensive, too defensive. Soon after, the late nights began. At first, it was an occasional evening here or there. But before I knew it, her work meetings were spilling into weekends. When I questioned her, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about tight deadlines. The excuses felt flimsy, but I held off on pushing. With each passing week, her explanations became less convincing. Then one night, she came home even later than usual. She smelled faintly of perfume, one that wasn't hers. I didn't say a word, but the silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with unspoken tension. That was when I realized I couldn't ignore this any longer. The final piece of the puzzle was her phone. Lily started leaving it face down whenever she put it down. It was a small thing, but it stood out. She'd never been secretive with her phone before, we used to share passwords without a second thought. Now, hers was suddenly different. When I asked about it, she waved it off, saying it was just a new security update. One evening, she left her phone on the couch when she went to the bathroom. My gut was screaming at me, and before I could stop myself, I reached for it. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from Jacob. "See you tomorrow. You're out of this world." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. My hands went cold, and my heart felt like it had dropped to the floor. I wanted to confront her right then, but I held back. Josh's voice played in my head, reminding me not to let anger take over without proof. Josh Hudson, an old friend who used to be a private investigator, had seen enough situations like this to know that rushing in blind would only make things worse. That night, I met up with Josh for drinks and spilled everything while nursing a beer I barely tasted. My hand gripped the bottle so tightly I half expected it to crack. "Stay calm," Josh said, his tone even and grounded. "Jumping the gun without proof will just give her the upper hand. Be smart about this. I hated how logical he sounded. All I wanted to do was go home, confront Lily, and force the truth out of her, maybe even let my anger get the best of me. But Josh had a point. If I stormed in without solid evidence, I'd come off as paranoid, maybe even desperate. So, what am I supposed to do? I asked, feeling like the ground was shifting under me. Josh leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin like he'd seen this play out 100 times before. Gather evidence. Track the patterns. If she's stepping out, you'll know soon enough. I left the bar that night with a sinking feeling in my gut. The weight of what I'd just shared, and what I might uncover, pressed down hard. I couldn't shake the image of Jacob's message from my mind. I replayed it over and over, as if analyzing the words would somehow lessen the blow. I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Lily slept soundly beside me, her breathing soft and steady. She looked peaceful, like nothing was wrong. But everything felt wrong. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I knew what had to happen next. This wasn't going to be a screaming match. I wasn't going to hurl accusations without backup. This was going to be an investigation. And if my suspicions were right, if she was really betraying me, then she wasn't just cheating. She was tearing apart the life we'd built, piece by piece. And if that was the case, she was going to feel the weight of every single consequence. After that night, something in me shifted. I wasn't about to sit in the dark, wondering anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt like hell. Josh's words stuck with me. Proof first. Confrontation later. The first step. Her phone. I found an app that let me monitor her texts and location without her realizing it. It took a few days of planning, but one evening, while she was in the shower, I finally had my chance. My hands were trembling as I installed the app, each passing second dragging out like an hour. Sweat dripped down my temples, and my heart hammered so loudly I thought she might hear it over the water. But I got it done. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand, scrolling through emails like it was just another day. Lily hummed to herself as she made coffee, moving around the kitchen completely unaware that her phone had become an open book. I watched her, watched the way she smiled to herself, like she didn't have a care in the world. It took every ounce of self-control not to slam my fist on the table and demand answers. But I held back. Josh told me to wait, so I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The first message from Jacob came through later that day. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Lily's reply popped up seconds later. Soon winking face can't wait either. The air left my lungs. I stared at the screen, feeling the cold rush over me like I'd just stepped outside in the middle of winter without a coat. There was no misunderstanding this. She wasn't staying late at the office. She was with him. And it wasn't just one-time thing. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming, each one cutting deeper than the last. They talked about sneaking away for drinks, slipping out during lunch breaks, meeting up when they were free. Jacob's words were full of flattery, the kind of things that made Lily feel younger, livelier. But the message that stuck with me most came late one night. I feel young again when I'm with you. That one word, young, hit harder than I expected. I knew exactly what it meant. Jacob made her feel something I hadn't in years. She felt alive with him. Excited. Wanted. Her reply was just a heart emoji. That night, I lay in bed next to her, but the space between us felt like miles of empty road. Her body was warm, but everything else was ice cold. I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, force her to explain why she was tearing apart our life like this. But I didn't. I needed more. And the night that followed? That was the one that changed everything. Lily told me she was heading out to visit an old coworker, someone I'd never even heard of. I forced a smile, nodding like the oblivious husband I was pretending to be. But the second she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. It didn't take long to figure out where she was really going. I watched as she pulled into the parking lot of a cozy little restaurant downtown. And there he was, Jacob, waiting at the entrance with that cocky grin plastered across his face. Lily practically floated toward him, and without hesitation, they embraced like two love-struck teenagers sneaking around after school. I stayed back, lurking in the shadows as they slid into a booth, leaning close, laughing and whispering like nothing else in the world mattered. When dinner wrapped up, they didn't exchange goodbyes at the curb. No, they climbed right into a cab together, hand in hand, and headed straight for a hotel. I followed them the entire way, my stomach twisting tighter with every turn. Once they disappeared through the hotel's revolving doors, I just sat there, staring, fully aware of what was about to unfold behind those walls. I could have barged in, dragged her out in front of Jacob and anyone else who happened to be watching. I could have humiliated her the way she was humiliating me. But I didn't. Instead, I walked back to my car, my hands trembling against the steering wheel the whole drive home. I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. Something else needed to happen first. A few days later, I showed up at her office under the pretense of bringing lunch. But I wasn't there for Lily. I was there for Julia Drake. Julia was another marketing specialist, someone I'd noticed over the years, a woman who always seemed to have a chip on her shoulder when it came to Lily's success. If anyone was going to spill the truth, it was her. And she didn't disappoint. The second Jacob's name left my mouth, I saw the shift in her expression. Julia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug, knowing smile. "Oh, so you know?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement. "It's not exactly a secret around here." My stomach tightened. "Everyone knows?" I asked, barely masking the frustration bubbling under the surface. She gave a lazy shrug. "They're not exactly subtle. I've caught them sneaking around more times than I care to count. Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't find out sooner." I clenched my jaw, biting back the anger rising in my chest. But what really got me wasn't the affair, it was the way Julia looked at me. Like I was some idiot who had been left in the dark while everyone else had front row seats. Then, as if twisting the knife wasn't enough, Julia leaned in closer, her voice dropping just enough to make sure I caught every word. "If you're looking to get even, I can help with that." Her words hung heavy between us, daring me to respond. For a moment, I sat there, not sure whether to laugh or walk away. But then, something shifted. If Lily could throw away our life together this easily, maybe I didn't owe her my loyalty anymore. I met Julia's gaze and offered a small, calculated smile. "Tell me more." And just like that, the wheels were in motion. Julia's offer wasn't something I had to think twice about. If Lily wanted to play this game, I'd make damn sure she knew what it felt like to lose. Julia was more than ready to step in. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about lust. It was pure, unapologetic revenge, two people using each other for the same reason. We started texting, and things escalated fast. She knew exactly what I was after, and I knew what she wanted in return. This wasn't some budding romance. It was war. This wasn't about love or passion. It was about making Lily feel every ripple of the choices she made. The first time Julia and I met outside of work, I booked a hotel room across town, far enough that no one would recognize us. Julia didn't hesitate. She showed up in a sleek black dress, her perfume trailing behind her like a silent warning. The way she carried herself, you'd think she owned the whole damn building. We didn't waste time with small talk. That night, I learned two things. First, Julia harbored just as much resentment toward Lily as I did. And second, she was perfectly willing to help me burn everything to the ground. After that, our meetings became routine. Sometimes we'd meet at her apartment. Other times, we'd park in dark corners of town, tucked away just enough to stay invisible. But the moments I savored most? The ones that happened right under Lily's nose. At home, I made sure to leave traces behind. A delicate earring, carelessly forgotten on the couch. A half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, stained with faint lipstick Lily didn't own. The lingering scent of Julia's perfume clinging to our pillows. Nothing obvious, just breadcrumbs, subtle enough to plant doubt in Lily's mind. At first, she didn't react. Maybe she noticed but brushed it off. Or maybe she convinced herself it was all in her imagination. But I caught the flickers, the way her eyes would narrow at the wine glass, her brow knitting together when she found the earring. Her smile would falter, just for a second. Then she'd shake it off and force herself to laugh, like she was trying to convince us both there was nothing to see. Meanwhile, things with Julia escalated. I stopped caring about caution. We met at the house in the middle of the day, fully aware Lily wouldn't be home. I'd make sure the sheets reeked of Julia's perfume, so when Lily slipped into bed at night, she unknowingly lay surrounded by the evidence. But what I really enjoyed, what kept me up at night with a twisted sense of satisfaction, were the questions I started asking Lily. Questions meant to pry at her, to chip away at whatever composure she had left. How was your dinner with your friend tonight? I'd ask, leaning against the doorway when she came home late. Her eyes would flicker, just for a moment, before she masked it with an easy smile. Fine, she'd answer, her voice too smooth, too rehearsed. I'd hum thoughtfully, letting the silence stretch out just long enough to make her squirm. Then, I'd throw in another grenade. You know, I was thinking, we should get away for the weekend. Just the two of us. Unless you're too swamped with work. Her jaw would tighten, and I'd catch the faintest flash of irritation in her eyes. She hated it. I knew that much. But she never snapped. Not yet. She'd brush it off with forced laughter or change the subject as fast as she could, pretending our lives hadn't become some quiet battlefield. But I wasn't fooled. I could see the cracks in her carefully curated facade. Every earring, every sarcastic remark, I could feel it slowly unraveling the life she thought she was in control of. At night, I'd lie next to her, but the space between us might as well have been miles. We were strangers in our own bed, reciting the roles of husband and wife with none of the affection that once held us together. I knew where her mind was. With Jacob. But mine? It was on something far more rewarding. I wasn't losing sleep over Lily. I was busy planning my next move. Julia reveled in the chaos we were brewing. One afternoon, as we lay tangled in bed, her nails tracing absent-minded patterns across my chest, she smirked and asked, "Think she's catching on yet?" I grinned, watching the ceiling. Oh, she knows something's up. She just hasn't figured out what to do about it. Julia laughed, a low, wicked sound that sent shivers down my spine. Good, she purred. Let her squirm for a while. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about making Lily feel every ounce of the fallout from her decisions. The first time Julia and I met outside of work, I reserved a room at a hotel on the far side of town. Julia didn't hesitate. She arrived draped in a sleek black dress that hugged her in all the right ways, her perfume trailing behind her like she was marking her territory. She walked toward me with the kind of confidence that made it clear, she wasn't there to talk. And we didn't. That night, I learned two things. 1, Julia's hatred for Lily burned just as fiercely as mine. And 2, she had no problem watching the whole thing collapse, brick by brick. From then on, our meetings became routine. Sometimes it was at her apartment, other times in the shadows of empty parking lots where no one would think twice. But the moments I enjoyed most? The ones that happened right under Lily's nose. At home, I started leaving little breadcrumbs behind. A forgotten earring tucked between the couch cushions. A wine glass resting on the coffee table, stained with a faint ring of lipstick. The subtle trace of Julia's perfume lingering on the pillows Lily laid her head on every night. Nothing blatant, just enough to spark doubt. Enough to let Lily feel the ground beneath her starting to crack. At first, she didn't react. Maybe she noticed and shrugged it off. Maybe she convinced herself it was nothing, that her imagination was playing tricks on her. But I caught the moments. The fleeting pauses, the faint frown when she spotted the glass, the way her fingers brushed over the earring, lingering just a little too long. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the suspicion, before she swallowed it down and forced a tight-lipped smile. I could tell the thoughts were swirling, but she kept them to herself. For now. Meanwhile, Julia and I only got bolder. I stopped bothering with subtlety. We'd meet at the house during the day, the same sheets Lily and I shared becoming a playground for something far more twisted. I didn't hide the scent Julia left behind. In fact, I made sure it lingered, faint but unmistakable. There was a grim sort of satisfaction in knowing Lily climbed into bed at night, completely unaware she was lying in the aftermath of my betrayal. But the best part, the real pleasure, came in the form of the questions I started asking her. Little, carefully loaded questions designed to poke at the edges of her calm. How was your dinner with your friend tonight? I'd ask as she walked through the door, smirking just enough for her to notice. She'd tense, just slightly, before smoothing it over with a well-practiced shrug. Fine, she'd answer, too casually. I'd hum in response, letting the silence stretch out, thick and heavy between us. Then, I'd drop another line. You know. I was thinking. We should take a weekend for ourselves. Get away for a bit. Unless work's keeping you too busy. Her eyes would narrow, and for the briefest moment, I'd catch the irritation flash across her face. She didn't like it, she hated it, but she never bit back. Not yet. Instead, she'd force a chuckle, deflecting with a joke or steering the conversation elsewhere like nothing was wrong. But I wasn't fooled. I could feel the cracks forming, could see the edges of her carefully crafted world start to fray. Every misplaced earring, every offhand comment, I was tightening the noose, slowly but surely. At night, the space between us grew wider. We might have shared the same bed, but we felt more like distant strangers playing pretend. She was there physically, but mentally. She was somewhere else. With Jacob, no doubt. But honestly, I didn't care. My focus wasn't on Lily anymore. I was already planning my next move. Julia, for her part, enjoyed every second of the destruction we left in our wake. One afternoon, she ran her fingers lazily down my chest as we lay tangled in bed, smirking as she asked, "Think she's catching on yet?" I grinned. Oh, she knows something's up. She just hasn't figured out how to handle it. Julia let out a soft, predatory laugh, low and full of satisfaction. Good, she murmured. Let her lose sleep over it. Julia's perfume lingered in the air, clinging stubbornly to the pillows and sheets twisted from our time together. By the time we were done, the house looked like the aftermath of some reckless affair, because that's exactly what it was. And I wanted Lily to notice every single detail. Julia left around 2 a.m., pressing a slow kiss to my cheek as she slipped out the front door. Her smile was sharp, almost playful. Good luck, she whispered. Text me when the fireworks start. I sat on the couch, cradling the last of my wine, staring at the dim glow of the lamp as I waited. Lily would be home soon, and I was ready. My pulse quickened, but it wasn't from fear. It was excitement. I couldn't wait to see her face, watch the pieces fall into place as she realized the game had shifted. At exactly 6 a.m., I heard the soft jingle of keys at the door. I stayed perfectly still, stretching out on the couch like I didn't have a care in the world. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Lily stepped inside quietly, her posture loose, satisfied, probably still glowing from whatever time she'd spent with Jacob. But the second she crossed the threshold into the living room, she stopped cold. Her eyes darted around the space, scanning the evidence I'd carefully left behind. The half-empty wine glasses, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume, the crumpled throw blanket still warm from where Julia had been. I watched the shift in her face, confusion, realization, and finally, panic. "Dylan," she began, her voice catching, unsure if she even wanted to ask the question lingering between us. "What? What's going on?" I leaned back, draping my arms over the couch casually, offering her a slow, deliberate smile. "What's the matter, Lily?" I asked, my tone light. "Something bothering you?" Her gaze locked onto the earring, Julia's earring, sitting plain as day on the armrest. I saw the way her eyes flicked from the jewelry to the wine glasses, her breath hitching as the pieces connected. Lily stepped closer, and I could almost feel the moment the perfume hit her. She froze like she'd walked into a brick wall. "Who? Who was here?" she demanded, voice trembling. I tilted my head, keeping my expression calm. "Oh, you know. Just like you've been meeting up with your friend Jacob." Her face paled instantly. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but there was no strength behind the words. I didn't bother explaining. Instead, I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and pulled up the photo, Julia and me, sprawled across the very couch Lily now stood in front of. I held it out, letting her stare as her face twisted from shock to disbelief, and finally, pure, simmering rage. "Now we're even," I said softly, savoring every syllable. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked at me, stunned, like someone struggling to breathe through water. I watched the panic set in, the slow realization that everything she thought she had control over was slipping away. In that moment, I saw Lily for who she truly was, someone who believed she could have everything, no strings attached. No consequences. No fallout. Finally, she found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. You cheated on me." I nodded, never breaking eye contact. "Sure did. Just like you've been cheating on me with Jacob." Her expression twisted, a blend of fury and hurt. "You bastard," she hissed. I shrugged. "Guess that makes two of us." Lily stood there, fists clenched at her sides, shaking with anger she couldn't quite direct. I could practically feel the heat rolling off her, the desperate urge to scream or lash out. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because the moment she accused me, she'd have to admit her own guilt. And she wasn't ready for that. I leaned back, calm as ever. "So, how was your night with Jacob? I'm guessing it went well." Her glare could have set the room on fire, but I just smiled, taking another sip of my wine. "You're a real piece of work," she seethed, her voice trembling. I chuckled softly. "Takes one to know one." Without another word, Lily stormed off toward the bedroom, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, soaking in the victory, letting the weight of it settle around me. The game was over. And I'd won. The next morning, Lily snapped. Just like I knew she would. She stormed out of the bedroom, her face set like thunderclouds rolling in. Her eyes were sharp, blazing with betrayal and anger. "You really think you can cheat on me and walk away like nothing happened?" she spat, standing across from me like she was ready to launch something straight at my head. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I didn't move. I sat there on the couch, calm as stone, watching Lily unravel in front of me. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and unlocked it, scrolling with deliberate ease. "Before you start throwing stones, Lily," I said, my voice steady, "maybe take a look at this." I swiped through the screenshots, every flirty message, every late-night text, and every little heart emoji she'd sent Jacob. There was no shortage of damning evidence. Enough secret rendezvous plans and sweet nothings to tear through whatever was left of our marriage. And then I showed her the piece de resistance. A photo of Lily and Jacob standing at the entrance of a hotel. Her hand rested gently on his arm, both of them grinning like a couple of newlyweds. I held the phone out for her to see. "Look familiar?" I asked, my tone neutral, almost bored. Her face drained of color as she stared at the screen, the anger in her eyes quickly melting into panic. I watched her mind scramble for a way out, some excuse, some explanation that might soften the blow. But she had nothing. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, the words spilling out in a messy rush. "Jacob and I, it's not serious. It was just." I cut her off with a raised hand, the gesture sharp and final. "Save it," I said flatly. "I'm not interested in hearing whatever excuse you've cooked up. The point is, you lied. You cheated. And I'm done listening to your stories." The weight of my words lingered between us, heavy and immovable. "So don't stand there acting like you're the victim." Her jaw tightened, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. She was searching for a way to flip the situation, but there was no play left. No card to pull. And she knew it. And then, right on cue, Jacob did exactly what I expected. A few days later, word got back to me, Jacob had cut ties completely. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. Either he was too smart or too much of a coward to let their little fling destroy his career. Lily was left picking up the pieces of her bad decisions. And I wasn't about to help her sweep up the mess. The moment Jacob bailed, I made my move. I wasn't wasting another second pretending to play house with someone who had burned it to the ground. The next morning, I called a lawyer. One of the best I could find. Ruthless. The kind of guy who saw divorce as war and never came out the loser. I wasn't interested in dragging this out. I wanted it over, and I wanted Lily to feel every inch of it. When she was served the papers, she tried to put on a show. "You're really going to throw away 10 years of marriage over this?" she asked, her voice thick with artificial sadness. I met her gaze without blinking, my eyes cold as steel. "You threw it away the second you let Jacob into our bed, whether physically or in your head. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She didn't have much to say after that. The court hearing came faster than I expected. That was fine by me. I was ready to end this chapter. Lily arrived with her lawyer, still clinging to whatever scraps she thought she had left. "He can afford more," she argued to the judge, glancing at him with watery eyes. "After all, he's the one who was unfaithful." I didn't react. I didn't need to. My lawyer stood without hesitation, calm and composed as he opened a thick folder and slid it across the table. Inside was everything. Every text. Every photo. Every hotel receipt. The evidence laid out with the precision of a man who had dismantled 1,000 marriages before mine. The judge flipped through it, his face giving nothing away. When he finally looked at Lily, I saw it hit her. For the first time, she understood. She had no leverage. No sob story that would win over the court. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. Probably telling her to take the loss and run. I saw the tears welling in her eyes, but it didn't stir a thing in me. She made her bed. Now she'd have to lie in it alone. The judge didn't waste any time. The prenup, oh, that prenup Lily had laughed off all those years ago, held up without so much as a blink from the judge. She'd walk away with a modest settlement, just enough to keep her afloat, but there wouldn't be a single cent of alimony. And since we had no kids, there wasn't anything else left to divide or argue over. When the judge's gavel came down, it felt less like a dramatic finale and more like closing a book I should have put down long ago. I'd been forcing myself to keep reading, long after the plot had lost its appeal. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Lily reached for me. One last desperate attempt to pull something, anything, from the wreckage we'd left behind. "Dylan, "We could fix this," she said softly, her voice trembling, thick with regret. "We could start over." I shook my head slowly. There was a weight pressing down on me, but not in the way I expected. This wasn't the burden of sadness. It was the release of finally letting go. "No, Lily. You broke it. And I'm done trying to fix it." Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, to plead, but I didn't wait to hear whatever excuse was forming. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, holding nothing but the pieces of what she'd shattered. By the time I slid into my car, I sat still for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, just breathing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally exhale. It was over. All of it. The lies. The late nights wondering if she was really working late or tangled up with Jacob somewhere. The knot that used to sit in my chest was gone. Lily could clean up her own mess. I owed her nothing anymore. She made her choices, and now she'd have to live with them. Once the ink dried on the divorce papers, I knew I couldn't stay in that town. Every corner held memories I had no interest in revisiting. The house, the restaurants, even the damn grocery store felt like ghosts waiting to remind me of everything I wanted to forget. I needed a clean break, somewhere the shadows of my old life couldn't follow. So, I sold the house. Every inch of it. Packed up what little I cared to keep and left the rest behind. I pointed to a city on the map I'd always been curious about and decided that was enough of a plan. Moving wasn't just about putting distance between me and Lily. It was about drawing a line between the man I used to be and the man I wanted to become. I'd spent 10 years sacrificing my wants and ambitions, always making room for someone else's dreams. That guy. I left him behind with the house keys. For as long as I could remember, I'd dreamed of opening a cafe. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Lily had always dismissed the idea, telling me it was impractical, that I should stick to a steady paycheck. And like a fool, I'd let her talk me out of it. But this time, it was my call. The first few months were rough. Long nights, early mornings, and more stress than I'd expected. But buried under the exhaustion was something else, exhilaration. I found a little corner spot in a lively part of town. The windows were massive, letting the sunlight pour in like it belonged there. It felt right, even before the first cup was brewed. I threw everything I had into that cafe. I picked out the best beans, designed the menu down to the last detail, and poured over every inch of the space until it felt like home. It became my obsession, filling the empty space where anger and regret used to live. When I finally unlocked the doors and let the first customers in, I didn't know what to expect. But the place caught on faster than I could have imagined. Sure, the coffee was good, but that wasn't what kept people coming back. It was the vibe. The feeling. It became a second home for the regulars. A place where names were remembered, and faces were familiar. A small community built on something real, something I'd created from the ground up. For the first time in longer than I could recall, I felt like I was building something worth holding on to. And this time, it was mine. Every choice, big or small, belonged to me. There was no one to answer to, no one to compromise for. Just me, figuring it out as I went along. I found joy in the little moments. Chatting with regulars, trying out new recipes, and staying late to rearrange the furniture just because I could. And then there was Stella. I wasn't looking for anyone. Romance was the last thing on my mind. But one weekend, there was this art event happening down the street, and something told me to go. Maybe I was just tired of being alone with my thoughts. I was strolling through the exhibit, trying to appreciate the art, when a voice beside me broke the silence. Who in their right mind drops $5,000 on something that looks like a toddler went wild with finger paint? I glanced over and saw her, Stella Mason. She wasn't like anyone I'd met before. There was no air of trying too hard, no performance or pretense. Just an easy, natural charm and a smile that made me feel at ease before I even realized it. We started talking, and by the time the gallery was closing, we'd moved to a nearby bar, swapping stories over drinks. There was something about her, something real, unfiltered, that I hadn't felt in years. After all the lies, the manipulation, and the weight of past mistakes, being around her felt like finally stepping into fresh air after living in a locked room. We didn't rush things. It was slow, deliberate. Coffee dates, long walks, conversations that stretched late into the evening. We let things unfold naturally, without pressure or expectation. Stella knew the broad strokes of my past, but she never flinched or judged me for it. In fact, she respected how I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up. One evening, we were sitting on the back patio, the sun dipping low over the horizon, when she glanced at the cafe behind us. "It's not just a business to you, is it?" she asked, her voice soft but certain. "It's something more, like a whole new life." I leaned back, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, and realized she was right. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "I guess it is." Being with Stella was easy. Effortless, even. No second-guessing, no games. Just two people figuring things out, step by step. We started dreaming out loud, talking about places we wanted to visit, road trips we'd take, adventures that felt within reach. I told her about my idea to open another cafe someday, maybe expand if things kept going well. She grinned, nudging me playfully. "Why stop at two? You could build a whole chain." I laughed, shaking my head. "Let's not get carried away, but yeah, I like the sound of that." For the first time in as long as I could remember, the future didn't feel like some heavy weight on my shoulders. It wasn't something I dreaded, it felt wide open, full of possibility. And as our relationship grew, I started to realize something else. Stella wasn't just filling the empty space Lily left behind. She wasn't some rebound or distraction. She was someone I could actually build a life with, a real one, built on trust and respect, with no need to constantly look over my shoulder. With her, I didn't have to carry the baggage of my past. Lily and Jacob. They weren't even on my radar anymore. They'd become nothing more than a few worn-out pages in a book I'd already closed. I was writing something new now. And for the first time, it felt like the story was mine from the very first line. One evening, Stella and I sat by the beach, the waves lapping at the shore as we talked about our next trip. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized something. I was happy. Not just content, but deeply, genuinely happy. Not because life was perfect, but because I was free. Free to live without the weight of old wounds. Free to love without suspicion. Free to move forward, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. And that? That was the best kind of revenge. Not bitterness. Not payback. Just living well.